Hey guys, I just wanted to apologize. I've had a lot going on, a lot of things changing with the channel. So I know that this review is about 14 days late.
18.
Where the hell did you come from? And if I put it out 18 days ago, that would have been before the movie even came out. That's not even possible.
What do you want for theory alone?
Well, I'm sure my audience will still enjoy it either way.
Chances are near zero.
That's just rude. You know, if you told me a year ago that the biggest box office battle of 2023 was going to be waged between Robert Oppenheimer and Barbie, I would have assumed you were on drugs. Not just some drugs, all of the drugs. But believe it or not, that's where we find ourselves. And to tell you the truth, it kind of went exactly the opposite of how I expected. But if you watched my Barbie review, and not enough of you did, you'd know that I was pretty much disgusted by that, film. But funny enough, I originally thought that was going to end up being a satirical romp that I would enjoy, and that Oppenheimer would be boring and overly convoluted, which would result in me passing out halfway through. As it turns out, I was completely wrong, and I never thought I'd be this happy to say that in my life. But what made Oppenheimer succeed where Barbie failed? Before I start, let me address the inevitable person in my comments. Yes, I'm aware that Barbie was a financial success. In fact, here's a clip of me saying that it would be. Say that this is probably going to smash, whatever its predictions are. I'm not sure how much staying power we'll have, but at least up front, it's going to make a shit ton of money. So I'm not shocked by this turn of events. What I mean by failure has more to do with the execution on screen rather than inside the marketing department. If you're a fan of history, or just vaguely paid attention to class when you were 16 years old, you'll likely know who J. Robert Oppenheimer is. Father of the atomic bomb and one of the most important people to ever live. His contributions to the world of science have irreversibly changed the course of human development both technologically and diplomatically. But just like every important historical figure, events happened in his life before the ones that actually made him famous. And that's where the story picks up. Sorta. It also picks up during and after the events as well. You might be asking yourself how that's possible. Simply put, the film is structured in 3 parallel non-linear storylines which go through the events. For simplicity's sake, I will mark these storylines as A, B, and C. Storyline A begins in 1926 with a 22-year-old Robert Oppenheimer who is studying abroad for his doctorate. Don't worry, he's going to study plenty abroad if you catch my drift. Upon return, he accepts positions at various universities with hopes of expanding American understanding of theoretical quantum physics. Along the way, he meets various members of the physics community who will become pivotal in the years to come, as well as meeting members of the American branch of the Communist Party. It's around this time that he meets both his future wife Kitty and his on-again, off-again affair partner Jean Tatlock, which sets in motion the events yet to come. For the most part, storyline A acts as a backdrop with details relevant to both B and C, but not completely fleshed out on their own. Storyline B is the real meat of the narrative, which deals with the entirety of the Manhattan Project as well as its immediate aftermath. This is by far the most well-known aspect of the historical period which the film is covering, but also brings to light things you often don't hear in history class, such as the realpolitik of the era, as well as some of the true behind-the-scenes reasons for the bomb's construction and usage outside of what many have been told. We also see exactly how Oppenheimer goes from being a simple scientist with good intentions to being thrust into the public eye as the father of the atomic bomb and all the implications and responsibilities that follow. As this further unfolds, we are shown the underhanded nature of some of those involved with the project, ranging from possible internal espionage to political posturing and even betrayal, mostly by those who Oppenheimer himself placed great trust in. This leads to character assassination and eventual disavowal at the hands of those who built their careers around his influence. It's a true web of lies and half-truths that at first may seem hard to follow, but eventually comes to all make sense. Seeing as how this remains to be the most well-known and discussed part of Oppenheimer's life, it's no surprise they leaned heavily into the marketing for the film using this plotline. Lastly, with storyline C, we have what is mostly the Louis Strauss section of the narrative, as we go through his Senate confirmation hearing to become the Secretary of Commerce. This portion provides the final pieces of the puzzle, solidifying all the details from the previous 2. If there's a section to criticize, it's this one, as it doesn't really add anything that we couldn't already infer from context clues. I've heard other reviewers refer to this as the most Nolan-y part of the story, and I tend to agree as it's the most self-indulgent and bloated. Though I was never bored during this section, I could see where people who are not quite as into the source material might be. Though I will say this, thank God they made this section black and white to give everybody a visual cue of the time difference. Truth be told, I have very few complaints about the plot. For the most part, it gives you everything you need. I guess if I had to nitpick a little bit here, I'd say I would have liked to have a little less Cillian Murphy nudity. I get that this is the story of a well-known philanderer's life, and Murphy is playing that dude, but those scenes were just awkward to watch. It's not aided much by the fact that Florence Pugh is 2 decades younger than Murphy. Other than that, I really can't think of much to complain about. Despite the disjointed delivery of the narrative, you're never left without contextual understanding. It flows rather fluidly between the non-linear storylines. If something is mentioned in one, it's often shown in another and reinforced in the last, creating a structural symbiosis. As for the characters, there's a ton, so I'll try to be brief and cover as many as I can. Obviously, Cillian Murphy is the star of the show. First, from a purely aesthetic standpoint, he absolutely nails the look. The hair, the mannerisms, everything down to Oppenheimer's trademark sickly, skinny look is downright perfection. Considering what he put himself through, I can't help but applaud his effort and commitment to the role. I think we can all give praise when we see an actor actually put in the work to look historically accurate rather than try to bend history to match them. Well then. As for his portrayal, I would argue for this to be considered for an Oscar, but that would be implying that the Oscars were worth a shit anymore.
Man, you don't know how many I've had my just to get this.
You really get a sense of the paranoia and panic that one would go through while trying to create such a massive weapon with possible unknown results. Subsequently, you can also feel the regret and depression that develops after, spoiler alert, the bomb is used to massacre hundreds of thousands of people, as well as the feeling of betrayal at the hands of those Robert put faith in as they turn him into a scapegoat. Murphy from top to bottom just crushes this role. There were times when I genuinely believed I was watching an actual documentary filmed of Oppenheimer himself. I could go on for another 20 minutes about how great of a job he did, but I'd rather leave it with this. For years, I always viewed Cillian Murphy as a typecast, creepy antagonist. It was always a role he played so well. But truly, this may be the film that changes his career forever. And quite frankly, it's well deserved. And that's in spite of what some people might say about his lack of Jewish heritage. Seriously, I can't wait till this trend of actors complaining about this shit is over. The surprise performance to many was Emily Blunt as Kitty Oppenheimer. She really captured the nature of a woman grappling with a struggling marriage as well as an unhappy home life. The emotional roller coaster that she takes us on from first meeting Robert through his negligent times, all the way up to his infidelity being made public record, tell the story of a woman who is strong yet reserved. Not necessarily content with her lot in life, but understanding the importance of what is happening. Truly, this portrayal personified the phrase, behind every great man there is an equally great woman. Matt Damon is kind of the odd man out in terms of the main cast. He holds his own for the most part, but isn't particularly convincing as a World War II general. That's not to say he didn't get the chance to show his acting chops a little bit. In many other films, he likely would have garnered significantly more praise, as he does have moments where he commands attention on screen, and even possibly has the best moment of levity in the entire film.
There's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world. Chances are near zero.
Near zero.
What do you want for theory alone?
Zero would be nice.
It really is a shame they put that line in the goddamn trailer. Seriously, stop doing that. To say Matt Damon underperformed in relation to the other actors is a bit unfair. Anyone would look mundane compared to a person who's putting in a performance of a lifetime. It would be a bit like calling Brian Shaw weak for coming in 8th place at this year's World's Strongest Man competition. Florence Pugh was also a bit of a surprise. She doesn't get a ton of screen time, but when she does, it's memorable. For, more reasons than one. She hasn't had much in terms of on-screen work comparatively to the majority of the cast, but she was still able to hold her own. She really stood out by approaching an extremely dramatic role in a reserved way, never overselling the moment but giving it weight. In many ways, this could end up being a breakout role for her. And this, coupled with Dune Part 2 coming out later this year, could possibly propel her into true leading lady status in short order. Also, can we just stop with this false narrative that she's too heavy? In a world where we have walking coronaries like Lizzo prancing around masquerading as healthy under the guise of body positivity, Pugh is an absolute dime in comparison. To say that Robert Downey Jr. was in need of a career-boosting role seems like such a strange combination of words coming out of my mouth. For over a decade, he was essentially the biggest star in Hollywood due to his fantastic portrayal as Tony Stark in the MCU. But since then, he really took a terrible gamble on Doolittle, and I think given the choice again, he would have negotiated to stay on as Iron Man just a bit longer. That being said, this role could be just what his career needs to step out of the shadow of his previous work. Downey really brings his A-game in a way we haven't seen from him in a very long time. Often when an actor is asked to depict a person who's blind to themselves being on the wrong side of history, it's played off as comedic. But here, RDJ is able to really give us the sense of a man who cannot see the fault in his ways, even as the evidence piles up to the contrary. Whether or not this is a career-defining moment for Downey is kind of irrelevant. He already has an established legacy and could coast on that for 30 more years if he so chooses. But at minimum, we'll likely see him in more Christopher Nolan projects going forward, as once you're in that dude's gravitational pull, it's damn near impossible to get removed. I could sit here for hours and talk about every single person who was in this film, ranging from people I thought hung it up years ago, to guys I could barely recognize, and even a few actors who seem to always crop up in big projects once every couple years. But it would truly save us a shit ton of time if I just sum it up as this. Whether the part be big or small, everyone seems perfectly cast, which is pretty much a staple of Nolan films. He often leans on the actors to do the heavy lifting, and that requires that even the smallest roles be filled by seasoned veterans. The pacing of this film is a strange case. Being 3 hours long, I can already tell you it could be trimmed significantly. The pacing of this film is terrible, and it could have been cut down by 20 to 30 minutes. By taking the 3-act structure and cranking that shit to 11, each act essentially takes up an entire hour. The first hour mostly consists of Robert's early years, attending university and working his way up through the scientific community. It moves at a fairly decent pace, going through the key points of his life, lingering just long enough to gain understanding of what's needed for the narrative to flow. It also lays seeds which will bear fruit in the later acts. It's also complemented by the beginning of his deposition hearing and Strauss's cabinet confirmation. The second hour is the one with the real meat of the film, taking the portion of his life that is most well known and placing it front and center. It's also the section with the best ebb and flow in terms of progressing the plot, building tension towards the inevitable crescendo, the detonation of the bomb. And like I said earlier, this portion was leaned in most for the marketing because it's really what people wanted to see. I mean, I like a good Senate back and forth just as much as the next guy, but really people paid money for this. And because of that, it seems to move at the quickest relative pace. That leaves us with the final third, which unfortunately is the slowest and least entertaining. It's also likely the most unneeded section of the film. It mostly serves as an aftermath where are they now sort of chapter, but it lacks any of the tension or drama from the earlier acts. It essentially amounts to a recap of events that we aren't shown much of through meetings and official statements. It's basically the section that no one had the balls to tell Christopher Nolan that he didn't need and therefore allowed him to be extremely self-indulgent. He's really just lucky that actors like Downey were able to carry the narrative through this rough patch to a satisfying ending. When it comes to production, there's never a single doubt that a Nolan film is going to look amazing. I can't think of a single instance of him putting something out without stunning visuals, and this is no exception. The usage of alternating black and white versus color to differentiate the time periods fits perfectly with the thematic feel. No, Nolan didn't invent this technique, it's been employed before, but here we have a textbook example of using something to its fullest effect. From a technical standpoint, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to get cleaner looking visuals. Choosing to film it in 70mm with IMAX in mind gives it a sharpness that simply cannot be matched. That being said though, this didn't exactly feel like a movie you need to see in IMAX, as it's mostly a character-driven, slow-paced drama that lacks any type of action sequences. Though I will admit, the explosion looked so good, it almost made it worth the extra money. I mean, it has to be pretty fantastic to make people assume you actually set off a real atomic bomb on set. On the flip side of the coin, I'm not exactly 100% certain why Nolan seems to have so much trouble with audio. This time it's not quite as egregious as Tenet, but damn man, please hire some better sound people, as there were times where the mixing could have used a serious overhaul. On the whole, Oppenheimer is a fantastic, albeit slightly flawed film. I was never bored at any point and found myself engaged even through the duller portions at the end. In an era where production companies view dramatic films as inferior to bright colors and whatever the fuck this is, it's good to see them take a chance on something different. So if you're a history buff, a science enthusiast, or just a fan of good cinema, give Oppenheimer a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. But for the love of God, make sure to piss first. The surprise performance to many was the Emily Blunt, the only one, apparently, yes. The Emily Blunt. It sounded like those annoying college football players who say the Ohio State University as if there's another Ohio State University trying to steal its name.